Good morning, one and all. Geometry is not new to us, isn't it? We have all been with it since our primary school days and have known it to have astronomical resonance as we grew older. Every architecture school starts the first day of the class with the ABCs of architecture, from triangles, squares, and circles, and the possibilities of geometries is resounding in all the architectural projects, but never comprehended fully. Never can be actually. Every attempt is only a new discovery. That is why this lecture is very relevant for our young aspiring architects and equally to be more experienced ones testing and exploring the possibilities of the shape and form and the life in our projects. I am Vinod Vijay Kumar, the director of CAAD, Chennai Academy of Architecture and Design. I'm an architect, planner, and also an urban designer with a practice background from Singapore. I'm extremely delighted to invite our guest speaker, architect Woon Chung from Singapore, to this 55th lecture of the CAD Public Lecture Series on a profound title, Perceived Geometries, Form Making in Architecture. I welcome my dear CAD students, my learned colleagues at CAD, and members of the architecture practice fraternity who are watching this lecture live over the Facebook page. I welcome our chairman, Professor Dr. V.R. Rajendran, the esteemed members of the management, and the members of the organizing team, Professor Dushyant, Professor Tanu Vedal, and a special thanks to my former colleague, Ms. Quiting, for introducing me to architect Chung Yen a year ago for a workshop to be conducted at CAD. It almost happened in March 2020, but we had to defer it to a later date due to COVID. I'm glad we are having this discourse in the meantime. The CAD lecture series started in the first month of inception of the institution, and we made it public and open to all since day one. Because the core value of any institution is to disseminate knowledge to the society where it belongs. Our outlook, though, has always been global. And internally, it has helped our students to build their focused interest in key disciplines related to architecture and set their future career direction. These lecture topics and content delivered build a scaffold to the ongoing academics at CAD. CAD is affiliated to Anna University, one of the oldest technical universities in India, and approved by the Council of Architecture India. It is one of the very few standalone architecture institutions purpose-built for a studio-based program such as architecture. This particular lecture, Perceived Geometries, Form Making in Architecture, attempts to shed light on how we perceive geometries in architecture and design and how their immeasurable aspects could be made intelligible. Upon such comprehensions of form making becomes consciously intentional and intuitive design ideas attain intersubjectivity. With these few words about the lecture, I wish to give a quick introduction to our speaker, architect Woon Chung, the principal of Meter Architect Singapore, holds a mark from my alma mater, the prestigious National University of Singapore. Woon Chung grew up in a Mandarin-speaking family, and before becoming an architecture student in the National University of Singapore, he played 3 Chinese musical instruments and practiced calligraphy and seal carving. The tutor who had the greatest impact on his architecture education was Mr. David Thomas, whose profundity is still beyond his grasp till the very day. Upon graduation, he worked for W Architects, Raffle Benoy Architects, and DP Architects on projects such as Pathlight School, University of Pennsylvania, Translational Research Center, New York University, Abu Dhabi campus, and the Singapore University of Technology and Design. He is a registered architect in the New York and Singapore, Winner of the 40 Under 40 Award of 2017, organized by Hong Kong's Perspective magazine, and recipient of the Most Revolutionary Architects aged 40 and under, awarded by the Singapore Business Review magazine. Chung Yen co-founded Meta Architects in January 2018 to explore the full spectrum of architecture's content, ranging from quantifiable to the perceptual, where the pragmatics of functionality are to be fulfilled and ultimately transcend to embody the intangible qualities of design. Accolades of the practice include Lookbox Design Awards 2018 and the 18th Singapore Institute of Architects Architectural Design Awards 2019. May I pass the screen to Mr. Chung Yen to take it up from here, please? Mr. Chung?
Thank you very much. Let me just set up the screen. Hi, can everybody see the screen?
Yeah, visible?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Vino, for the very kind introduction. I really like your words about geometries and the perception. Today, we talk about perceived geometries because this is a topic very close to my heart. And perceptions in architecture, I find it to be less talked about, but definitely not less important. So thoughts affect actions. Our design is guided by our ideas. And how good our design will be depends on how well we understand architecture. And the understanding of architecture is very much like blind man touching an elephant, because you can only understand something from the outside in. So try to list down for yourself what you think architecture is all about. These could be the causes, the effects, the symptoms, or any manifestation of architecture. And now each word or phrase is one body part of this architecture elephant. And then we need to categorize that because new knowledge comes from categorization. A binary approach is perhaps always the simplest and the clearest. And then we need to describe these two categories. We may have heard before that architecture is a combination of science and art. Seismic design is a science, and beauty is the pursuit and embodiment of art. This also relates to the human anatomy. Code compliance is logical and rational and governed by the left brain, while concepts are imaginative and creative, coming from the right brain. We may also define them as quantifiable versus perceptual. Budgets and timelines, they are quantities. The historical sense or the cultural flavors of a place are perceptual. And if anything is quantifiable, it shall also be measured. You can measure wind speed, you measure wind direction, you can measure sun angle, versus memories and experiences that are immeasurable and intangible. So our understanding of architecture shapes our practice, firstly in its name. Understanding this duality of architecture, we discovered that a very commonly used word, meter, which means a basic unit of measure and hence quantifiable, also refers to a sense of rhythm, both in poetry and music, and hence perceptual. Meter Architects was set up 1st January 2018 to explore the full spectrum of architecture's content, ranging from the quantifiable to the perceptual. We see this duality of architecture that it has two components to it. Now, are they equally important, or is one more important than the other? Let me show you an example which may give us an answer. These three buildings are right next to each other on adjacent plots. Their very close geographical proximity means that they are subject to the same geographical parameters. They have similar seismic loads, they have similar wind loads, and they face the same western sun. And yet, the architecture is not identical. I would like to pair each building with another from elsewhere to try and discover what the architecture is about. The first pairing, it tries to incorporate certain religious or cultural motifs in order to achieve a historical or a cultural sense of identity. The second pair of buildings both deal with very simple geometric shapes, so simple that they almost have a certain mathematical clarity, perhaps due to this belief that simple geometric forms, like the pyramids, may ultimately be the most timeless. And the last pair of buildings try to express complex curves which are made possible recently with the advancement in technology. Now, incidentally, Shanghai Tower, the twisting form, is also to reduce the impact of wind load on the building, because apparently in this locality, wind loads are often more severe than seismic loads. So, this question, is architecture more about the group on the left or the group on the right? If architecture is mostly about the quantifiable and the measurable, then similar parameters would yield similar architecture.
You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Woon. On the screen, at the bottom portion. Within the Chrome window. No, you're not audible yet, Mr. Woon.
Mr. Woon? Mr. Woon, you're not audible yet. Mr. Woon, your screen went on mute for 2 minutes now. So you have to unmute the screen. I think you received a call and it went on mute since then. So just hover over the screen.
Okay, hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Apologies for the disruption.
No
Let me
problem.
just
We just missed 2 minutes of your time.
So let me continue from this slide. We were at the question of asking, is architecture more about the group on the left or the group on the right? So here is this hypothesis or the argument or the position that I want to put forth. If architecture is mostly about the quantifiable and the measurable, then similar parameters would yield similar architecture. Right? The fact that these three buildings are vastly different, it shows that beyond satisfying the measurable and the quantifiable, there is still a large portion of architecture left to express the perceptual and the immeasurable. So this is the first argument. The second argument or the second reasoning comes from this saying, which I interpreted as such. In architecture, you first have to learn all that is quantifiable and measurable, and then apply them correctly. And perhaps the ultimate goal of form making is perceptual, because magnificence is a perception. I would like to talk about the perceptual in architecture. What do we mean by that? A first impression of this building would likely be that this building looks like almost 90% art and maybe only 10% science. You know, that might be a first impression because it is so artistic, so expressive. You've not seen anything like this before. But of course, Corbusier would have satisfied all that is measurable and quantifiable. For example, the solar orientation. You see the east and west facades less than that of the north and south. And this building orientates to the sun angle from the south. The roof form that we perceive to be so sculptural is actually very precise in blocking the high angle summer sun and allowing heat to enter from the low angle winter sun. For quantifiable aspects of architecture, we can analyze them like this with clarity. But how do we analyze the perceptual qualities of architecture? I remember seeing images of this building as a first-year architecture student, and I was most intrigued by the two concave facades. These two concave facades. To me, they are external facades that feel interior. External facades that feel interior. The curvature on the east side is the backdrop for the exterior altar and pulpit. This curvature is also an acoustic device to project the sounds from the altar and choir onto the pilgrims gathered on the hill. And then I realized that this exterior facade feels interior because it feels intimate. An exterior facade having the intimacy of an interior space due to its curvature, which acts like an embrace. The difference in perception when you stand in front of a concave versus a convex wall is obvious. In front of a concave wall, you feel welcoming, you feel inviting. The curve tends to want to pull you inwards. Whereas in front of a convex wall, it feels assertive, slightly confronting, and the wall tends to push towards you. So as a first-year architecture student, I have discovered for myself my very first perceived geometry. A concave feels intimate. As students, we should expose ourselves to good architecture, either through images or in real life. But we should not imitate them. We should pause and think for ourselves why we like certain perceptual qualities of good architecture that we have seen, and try to extract the principles behind it. In this case, for my first year final project, I use a concave wall to organize the spaces around the house so that you can have two very distinct atmospheres on the concave and on the convex side. This was in the year 2000, but everything that you have learned will stay with you. Next, I would like to share 6 projects from the office, both interior and architecture, both built and yet to be built. And in this very first interior that I want to show, we continue the exploration of the curved geometry. This is a resale unit. The owner mentioned that she bought this unit because she likes this very gentle curve of the external facade, which is quite distinctive because apartments tend to be more rectilinear. She currently stays with her dad, so this just needs to be so-called a weekend house that only requires 2 bedrooms. So this bedroom in the front, adjacent to the living room, can be demolished to make space for a larger living area that allows her to invite friends to come and cook and have a meal together. Existing photos of this resale unit, we see a comparatively narrow living room space and the gentle curvature of the facade that she wants. The first thing that we did was to demolish the bedroom beside the living area. And then we were thinking, how do we start? How do you even draw the first line of your design? So in design, there is also a duality. On one hand, you have the requirements and the preferences of the owner. On the other hand, you have your own spatial history, have your own understanding of geometry. So design is actually the moment of synthesis where this duality comes together. You search through your spatial history and you discover one geometry able to understand the project, to able to answer the project brief. And in our case, it is this curvilinear geometry, giving a sense of intimacy, as we have mentioned before, but also as a very gestural gathering, and not forgetting the owner's preference for the curved geometry. And this is how it looks. In year 1, I was exploring the perception of a concave wall, but now this concave geometry is only at the base of the space. The top part of the space is made to be very airy and light with white painted color. The ground is given a very warm timber tile color. And the overall effect is that this space feels very grounded because emphasis is on the ground. You feel the curvature of this bench around the lower parts of the body. So the moment you come into this space, you just want to sit down and relax. We fixed the perimeter so that the central area could be very flexible. During photography, we played with the placement of furniture. Without real people using the space, you can sense the possibility of certain pairing with certain geometry, and you see the intent or the possibility of very flexible groups of conversation during the gathering. Wherever you are in this space, you can feel a very strong presence of this concave from the bench. And the dining table is like a boat. This concave bench is like a crescent-shaped bay. This boat is allowed to dock at any point along this crescent bay. We try, whenever there's an opportunity, to incorporate certain Asian concepts or ideas. This Japanese idea of Ichigo Ichie, one time, one meeting, which means any meeting or event is unrepeatable and hence unique. We foresee with this kind of arrangement, the furniture placement shall be very hospitable to changes, to each gathering, making every event unique. The colored droplets on the left is actually a piece of sculpture by a local artist, and it's under the owner's collection. So we have designed that into the space. In design, we usually want to do one gesture satisfying multiple intentions. This curve is given an upward lift for several reasons. Number one, we immediately achieve three-dimensionality for this bench. And it becomes a nice area for a backdrop or for a little display. And more importantly, remember previously we had demolished the room adjacent to the living space. So now the bedroom door is exposed. So this vertical curve now becomes a spatial cue to delineate the private from the public space. Another way where we try to incorporate Asian ideas or concepts is from calligraphy. The brush stroke is never uniform. You would express the start and the end of the brush stroke differently. And hence our articulation of the beginning of this curvature in a very strong convex cave. Notice the dark shadows contrasting very strongly with the very muted wall behind. And for the end of this brushstroke, it is a vertical lift upwards. Another concave that frames the wall-mounted light, almost like moon rising over the mountain. And this is our attempt at poetic design. Nowadays, with Instagram, it is quite easy to observe how the space is being used after handover. Not sure what went wrong with the sound.
It went on to mute immediately. So we did not use much. I think it is the previous slide which we need to start from.
Previous slide. Okay.
From the Instagram post.
I'm not sure why this happened, and I hope it doesn't keep continuing. Okay. Previous slide.
Yeah.
Which is this?
Yeah, correct.
So I was saying, nowadays with Instagram, you can very easily observe how the space is being used after handover. They are the friends of the owner, and you notice how they are sitting at different levels. And there's a certain casualness and spontaneity to it. which would not be possible with a more conventional TV sofa kind of arrangement. We also notice, or rather the owner noticed for herself, that this space is highly kid-friendly, possibly because it evokes a certain kind of imaginative play. The storage area becomes appropriated as playhouses, and coincidentally, the profile of the cover looks like a picture of house. This is the latest photo showing the festive mood that all Singaporeans have now, looking up, anticipating for National Day celebration this coming Sunday. We were very happy and proud that this project got featured on Label, a very established design website. And we find that this design with a simple curvature really changes the way we perceive space, tries to give a new typology or a new template to residential living. Next, I would like to talk about gradient space. The previous design, we explored the possibilities or the perceptual qualities of a curve. In gradient space, we explore the perceptual qualities of a diagonal. The owner is a young professional, so pretty much similar brief to the earlier project. The only difference is that there is only one single space in this studio apartment. So everything has to happen within 43 square meters. This is a new condominium. The unit already comes with certain built-in carpentry, cabinetry, built-in kitchen counter, storage, and the wardrobe. I would like to use this to show the greatest desires of all designers. This chair placed in an empty room is absolutely beautiful. I think all designers, regardless of furniture design, product design, architects, interior designers, you have a similar desire to create something beautiful. And this something beautiful happens to be functional. As architects doing interior design, I feel that perhaps there is also a certain tendency to read the blank spaces of the interior as the project site or the project plot boundary. And your solution will be a singular building or an object within this site. Design happens not linearly, but we try to explain design sequentially so that there's some clarity. The first intervention is the sliding glass panels here to contain the kitchen cooking smell. At the same time, we immediately create an entry vestibule so that your entry sequence could be layered. You do not step directly into the main space of the house. And on this elevation, we introduced our very first diagonal. Starting from bench height of about 450 millimeters, this is where you sit and wear your shoes. Shoe cabinet is below. From this height, we did one rising diagonal across to lead your eye to the daylight beyond the balcony. So we planted specific spatial cues for the users of the space. A diagonal is simple but very distinctive. So immediately, this space acquires a certain kind of character. Next, we introduced two more diagonals. Behind the glass sliding panel, we want to continue this kitchen counter at the back. The first diagonal is a taper because we foresee quite a lot of heavy traffic around this corner. So this diagonal makes sense more as a shortcut. The second diagonal is in the elevation of the upper story cabinage because we want to allow more daylight to come in and land on the cooking counter. So this works as a light funnel. A photo of the space, no doubt in the evening, but we see very clearly the geometry of these two diagonals acting as a light funnel. And if you see this from the other angle, when you enter the apartment, these two diagonals now become a gesture. They gesture towards the central piece of the design, which is right here. In front of the built-in wardrobe, we leave the space enough for a queen-size bed, and we pinch the steps downwards slightly to better orientate the steps to the space. We like these so-called half steps very much. They were used whenever you want to save space, you want to save the overall footprint of the steps. Notice all the micro differences between these three options. But in design, no detail is too small. You really have to spend the effort to explore options to see for yourself which is the best geometry. We chose this geometry because it is interesting to have this winding step going up. While the steps go up vertically, this plane steps sideways from the front, and that becomes a horizontal step. Notice in a short distance, the very light and the very dark happens together. So this is what gives the object the very sculptural quality. We did many drawings, not for presentation, but to ensure that we communicate the drawing correctly to the contractor, because communication of design is as important as the design itself. So we literally built the entire carpentry in the virtual world, even showing the underside, how certain plywood panels, when you do them vertically, they could be like structural supports for the entire carpentry. We are able to get all these different angles, the key plan section and elevations, because there's so much change in the step. Basically, every new step, you require a new section. So 4 sectional plans, 4 longitudinal sections, and 4 cross sections. Our efforts really paid off because the carpentry works turned out to be very accurate. This was before renovation, and we do a comparison. The newly proposed is seamlessly integrated with the existing, and it appears as if everything is designed and built at the same time. And this integration also means that there is a singular materiality. It feels as though everything is carved from a single piece of wood. We named this project Gradient Space because it is really just one diagonal. How do we perceive this diagonal? At the base, it is open. You come here to meet friends. You come here to enjoy good company. At the top of this diagonal, the ceiling height is relatively lower, hence it feels more enclosed. You come here to relax, to rest. You come here to be alone. So one diagonal connects 2 extremes of life, extroversion at the base and introversion at the top. Not forgetting the generous volumes of storage that we have with the rise of the curve, with the rise of the gradient. We can also say that these storage volumes justify this diagonal. photo from the owner showing the friends using the space as designed. We're very happy that all of them like the space very much. One challenge for this design is how do you achieve a sense of privacy for a bed that is in the open? For this, we refer to the book Poetics of Space. It is a magical book on all the immeasurables and the perceptual. Not an easy read, but very well worth the effort. We often hear that if you are in a cold environment and you don't have enough warm clothing, you need to keep your feet and your neck warm. Because if these two parts are warm, your body will think that you are warm. And by the same token, this is a spatial illusion. When we take refuge in a corner, an imaginary room rises up around our bodies, and we will think that we are well hidden, a spatial illusion. This generated two very small but very important details. Two more diagonals rising up on each side of the bed, creating two corners. And together with this backdrop, they give a sense of enclosure without really enclosing. This gradient is also like a landscape. You feel as if you are lying on sloping ground. Especially in current pandemic times, it is important for interiors to be able to give a sense of the outdoors. It should be able to evoke the playfulness of natural real landscape. We see through the balcony opening that this is actually a very dense neighborhood with heavy traffic and busy roads. Yet with a dimming of the light, the whole space becomes a sanctuary for the evening. We were most humbled that 1 year after setting up Meter, Gradient Space won us an honorable mention in the interior category of the SIA Awards. This gives us the much needed encouragement to push ahead for our future designs. The third interior I'm sharing shows that if you have a spatial idea, you could first test it out on the interior scale. And if it works, and if you're happy with the results, you can then apply it at the architectural scale. Our interior designs so far has been very singular. A singular curved bench, a singular gradient. And this third project shall even be more singular than the previous two. We have added one cabinet between the sofa and the dining table behind, but with an opening in the center. The existing window frame is black color, which the owners have no need to change. So immediately we thought we should use a dark color laminate to achieve a more monochromatic feel to the design. Now, most owners would want their homes to be bright, but this family is actually quite cool with dark colors. So we are very much appreciative and thankful of that. Thin linear light matching the profile and the color of the window frame. Dark laminate matching the shadows in front of the recess to the bedroom doors. If this laminate had been from either of the earlier two projects, the design effect would not have been as good. The opening here is defined by 4 slanted panels, almost acting as a funnel to concentrate your gaze towards the opening. The front part of this opening is plain, while the back part is with perimeter lighting to throw a warm glow onto the dining table. This laminate color achieves a certain richness under the light, and that color evokes the mood or the ambience of a wine bar. On one side of the cabinet, we have a Chinese author. This facade or this plane faces the window, and we integrate the entire altar into the overall design. The perception of an opening is that whenever there is one, you connect, you encourage this visual connection to the other side, and you will become more conscious of the other side than when it was just one big open space. We often wonder till this day, for the entire living area, we had proposed only one cabinet, and we didn't do any other design. We wonder, how did we pull this off with just one cabinet? And then we realized we did not just propose a single cabinet, we had proposed 4 feature walls. Wherever you are in this space, you will be able to feel the impact of at least 1, if not 2, of such feature walls. So the design sense of a singular cabinet gets projected onto every corner of this space. And that is how, just by one cabinet, we managed to elevate the mood or the ambience of a space and make it feel very designed. So this idea of an opening shall be further explored in an architecture project that we will show later. The next project is a private house in Singapore. It is still under construction. In Singapore, when we say semi-detached houses, it means one pair of house, different owners, but they share the same dividing wall. They share the same party wall. Our owner's house is on the left, single story, and the neighbor had previously maximized or reconstructed the house to the maximum envelope, which is 3 stories with an attic. We shall also be reconstructing this single-story house to 3 stories, but the owner has no need for a big house because that would mean more time and effort to clean and to maintain. So this is the first requirement. The second requirement is that they are very private people. They do not like passerbys on the street able to peer into their house through the gates, which apparently has happened a few times before. The orientation of the plots, on the west side, we are sort of shielded by the neighboring house. So we think that we just need to handle some form of a minimum sun shading on the eastern facade. If we orientate the plot to view from the T-junction, we understand why the owner wants privacy. Compared to the neighboring house, with only this frontage facing the road, our client's house has more than 50% exposed. So privacy is one key requirement for this house. These are the setbacks, which means the house cannot be built onto the limits of the boundary. On the ground level, we maximize this setback. We have common areas of the house, the living room, the dining room, kitchen, and a guest room. On level 2, we start to pull away from the dividing wall, creating private terraces. And this area is just enough to house 1 bedroom each for the 3 kids. The 3rd floor is a further setback with its own terrace, just enough to have a fairly large master bedroom. We foresee the facades that face the internal to be very porous with sliding glass panels. This is what we call an introverted house. We only want small windows on the street facade. And the porosity needed for daylight and ventilation is actually on the back. We also feel the need to articulate our own wall. And notice how on 3 sides there is an extension of the fin, almost like a visor, to have more shielding and more sense of privacy for these outdoor terraces. A very simple form, but there is clarity of intent, which is private terraces that are hidden from view on the street frontage. This feature wall is also very important in accentuating the step profile of the house by serving as a contrast or a reference. This wall is double-story high and very close to the internal spaces. And it feels almost like looking at a painting up close, which is how Mark Rothko wants us to experience his buildings, his paintings. You are supposed to immerse yourself almost meditatively in the colors. This feature wall is also 20 meters long. So we felt there is an opportunity to reference the sense of immensity. In nature, there is a tendency for greater concentration of lines in the middle than in the sky or on the ground. Hence our distribution of the lines in similar logic. Not just a playful pattern, but something evocative of another experience. We brought one line up to meet this inherent diagonal of the staircase, and we express a submit at this point. 2 shades of cladding to relate to the stepping of the facade on the front. Within a fairly boxy form, we have another form to break away from this boxiness. So almost like form making within the form. We know that this design has achieved intersubjectivity when the client says that it looks majestic. These are the photos of the current state of construction. Notice this step profile in comparison to the neighbor, which is up front. Feels more private, feels more exclusive. And we can also feel the impact or the effect of this shield, making this a big feature wall feeling just a bit more intimate. This is on level 2, outside the kids' room. Certain times of the day, the entire feature wall is in the sun. And this gives another perception. You will feel as if the outdoor area gets extended to go all the way up. You feel as if the entire feature wall is part of your outdoor terrace area. So you feel a greater width of the terrace than it actually is. This is on level 3. The moment we pull the building away from the wall, we are effectively creating what we call a here and there relationship. and the distance between them is emphasized. Again, you feel that this distance is bigger than when the same area is under an enclosure. When the owners said that they have no need to maximize the house, they get rewarded. They get rewarded because these external surfaces now become receptacles of nature, and they will project light and shadow onto the interior spaces, making this experience very animated. In this house, we explore the perceptions of distance, and hopefully before the end of the year, we get to complete this house. For the last two projects, let's go outside Singapore. This is Gulshan area, the wealthiest neighborhood in Dhaka. The owner of the existing Westin Hotel wants to be the first in Dhaka to enter the ultra-luxury hospitality market. So on this empty plot directly to the south of Westin Hotel, he wants to build St. Regis Hotel. And of course, we are super excited to be given this opportunity to be the design architects for the project. If we want our design to be good, if we want our design to be received by the locals, we first have to perceive the city. I would like to show you Dhaka through my eyes as a foreigner. From a room in Westin Hotel, this is the view towards north. We see what they call the Gulshan Circle 2, and this is a major road, the busy Gulshan Avenue. View to the south, we see the plot partially, and that was previously used as a parking space for Westin Hotel. From Gulshan Circle 2, looking towards the south, we see the existing Westin Hotel on the right. And just across, the new Hilton Hotel is coming up. So competition is coming up. A sampling of buildings along Gulshan Avenue, except for few exceptions. The rest of the buildings are generally in the modernist language. But the fact that they are all predominantly modern also means that at a quick glance, none of the buildings actually stand out. We also looked at 4 St. Regis hotels in Asia, with the exception of the bottom left. The other 3 are in the modern language. So much so that if we were to switch the top 2, perhaps it may still fit. So these are our observations or perceptions of Dhaka, of existing buildings, of St. Regis, and we incubate them. We hold them in our mind as we try to get to the design. Before we got appointed, the owner's in-house team, they have resources, big company, the owner's in-house team already has done the submission drawings and had gotten local approval. This is the section, common spaces at the podium, hotel in the center, and service apartments at the top. I would like you to pay attention to 3.6 meters as the floor-to-floor height. We will get back to that in a moment. The typical hotel plan, as you can see, is already developed to a certain level of detail before we got appointed. But of course, not saying that it cannot be improved. In this plan, I would like you to pay attention to the column grid of 10.325. Next, I want to talk about solar orientation. If your building is in nature, you could achieve the perfect solar orientation. But in an urban context, you may likely face conflicts. Existing Westin Hotel by the owner is blocking the view to the north. Buildings on the south are currently about 5 to 6 stories, but there's no guarantee that there may be a future tall development coming up if they buy over the land. The west side is generally residential and there are lots of greenery, so that is good. And on the east, of course, we are faced with the busy Gushan Avenue. So if you want to prioritize or you want to maximize the view, which is what the local team did, you would have the east and west facades greater than the north and south facades, which is a direct conflict of ideal solar orientation. What this means is that we will have to have a good system of sun shading on the east and west in order to turn this into something positive. Remember the 3.6 meters floor-to-floor height? We discovered that the column grid, if you divide by 3, you get something very close to 3.6. What we call a quad C square. Your perception may buy it or you may perceive it as an approximated square. What this means is that now we could have a simple basic module to develop the sun shading on the east and west facades. We have an intuition for an interplay of two simple geometries. We realize a circle may not integrate well. There may be some complex surfaces. So we did what we call a 12-sided polygon. Per local code, sun shading can protrude 500 mm from the facade. So imagine the blue on the building facade itself and the red 500 mm in front of the building facade. And if we join these two geometries, this is what we get. The moment we got this, we immediately sent for 3D print because we are just too excited to see how this geometry will appear in real life. One of the greatest tortures of architecture is perhaps waiting for your 3D print to finish. So we went home. The next day, we come to office, we see this. At the top, the 12-sided polygon is very clearly, very pristinely expressed. At the base, we see the square. And this is 1:10 scale, so the entire model is 5 cm high. Imagine the brass color plate is the building facade. Your sun shading is actually coming up by 500 mm away from the facade. So we are quite pleased with this result. So we go back to the drawing board and say, now we need to repeat this module. Single module of 3.6. If you have 4 modules at 7.2, you start to see an intricate flower pattern in the middle. And at 9 modules, you feel as if this is a very delicate lattice grid. And we also immediately tested this 9 module at 1:30 scale. We want to see the impact of daylight on its undulating facade. We hold it up to the sky. We imagine this in full scale, and not forgetting to frame a view through this, because the basic design idea of this is that the sun shading shall not be merely horizontal or vertical, never utilitarian, but in a circular shape that is, again, like a visual funnel to try to enhance the framed view when you look out from the hotel room. And then we have an overall uniform grid. We did what we call a subtraction exercise. So we start with this uniform grid. If we delete the parts in red, we get this geometry. The ends are tapered, very slender. And this could become one way to express the limits of this grid. We did many such subtraction exercises. I would just like to show you one more, starting from a uniform grid. If we delete the parts in red, we get this. A continued discontinuity. Even if we discontinue this part, you will still feel that this lattice runs through. Notice how we started with a square. Now we have another square appearing, just rotated 45 degrees. So just by subtraction, we are able to achieve some very intricate patterns. We know we are getting onto something. And this is how it looks on the building. This solution satisfies all the observations that we have during our design incubation period. This is the extensive or elaborate shading for the east and west facade to mitigate heat gain. And the geometry departs significantly from merely rectilinear, which is just a very basic modernist language. This distinguishes itself and the building from the rest along Goshan Avenue. Remember the building footprint that is quite squarish. So that would actually generate a building form that feels very heavy. Instead of making it look heavy, we try to make it strong by giving it a certain monumental sense, which we felt is befitting development of this prestige. The shimmering colors from the intricate sun shading, it gives a certain sense of craftsmanship, a certain sense of luxury that we feel befits the branding of a St. Regis hotel. The owner and in-house team are very much convinced of this, but we want to do more. So this was just the east and west facades. We went back to the drawing board. We felt that St. Regis should never be about maximizing the floor plate. So on the prominent south elevation, we propose on the even floors a triple bay suite room. These could be open or indoor pools. On the odd floors, we propose a garden. Each pool or garden is now double volume so that the facade is being opened up and the luxury from within is being revealed. From busy Goshan Avenue, you look up, you'll be attracted by an open facade. And yet you realize that this luxury is lifted off the ground, exuding a certain sense of exclusivity. The owner likes this very much. We are currently developing this design further. Now we come to the final project, which is actually a competition. This is an invited competition for corporate headquarters. We were very much honored to be invited by one of the best architectural firms in Dhaka to collaborate with them as one of the 3 invited teams. Goshan is the wealthiest neighborhood in Dhaka. Churchgaon is the up-and-coming neighborhood in Dhaka. The site faces a prominent ring road. The plot is open on 3 sides. So we know immediately that form making for this project shall be very important. And the design ideas have to be good and relevant if we want to win this competition. We believe ideas have to be grounded in the context, so I would like to share some of my further observations of Dhaka. The first thing that hits me is actually the vibrancy, perhaps due to its large population. You see people getting on with their lives. You see their dressing, you see the decorations on their trishaw. You see men and women walking side by side along the road during lunchtime. You see vendors making a living at any typical road junction. You see young people on cell phone, obviously having a very much different lifestyle. But no matter how different you are, you can come here and feel included. This pairing of a national monument with open steps is one of the best examples or best ways to express civicness. This is architecture at its most hospitable. No matter what background you are, you could come here and have a good time. But that openness has since been fenced up because now security supersedes civicness. If you want to visit, locals or foreigners alike, you have to apply beforehand. The first time I was in Dhaka, I didn't apply that beforehand. I only get to see the building around the perimeter. And this image got my attention. We see two fence here, but the front has some fence pieces on the ground and they are taking photos, or it appears to be so. And then I realized this location where the fence broke is actually at the exact axial point of the north elevation of the Parliament House. This became one of the architectural moments for myself because I witnessed firsthand the power of symmetry and the allure of the architectural axis. It speaks to all of us, regardless of race, language, or religion. Hence, we like to incorporate such observations or such ideas into the project, and we wonder, how could we do so? Setback from the common boundary is 3 meters, from the road is 1.5 meters. This plot feels like a twisted, some geometry that is pushed or skewed sideways. So the first intuition was, can we return symmetry to this plot? This is the podium side coverage of 64% out of the maximum allowed coverage of 75%. And the tower could be like this, 47% coverage out of the maximum allowable of 50% for the tower. We are slightly short on side coverage, but the total floor area proposed is still greater than 100,000 square feet, which is the requirement stated in the brief. This is, up to this point, just an intuitive form, an intuitive floor plate. We know there's symmetry, there's axis, but we're not sure whether it will work. So very quickly, again, we have to print it out to examine this form. A vertical corridor in the middle and steps on the inside to the scale of the company. And because we express the podium geometry or the podium area within the form, this building has the same footprint extruded upwards. We have another intuition for the expression of this detail. The same facade, the same plane coming down, going across the height of one step and up here again as one single plane. So immediately we know we have to print a bigger scale, twice the scale, just the front, so that we can print quickly, because in competition you really don't have a lot of time. our intention. The same plane coming down across the height of one step, going up. It feels like a succession of U shapes stepping outwards. The top portion feels like it is a gateway to something beyond. The bottom portion feels like a door of a bank vault that is very secure, very protected. This geometry also articulates what we have mentioned before, a kind of a focus or a funneling effect to the central opening. We even printed entire sectional models to look at the geometry or interface on the inside. So how do you know whether your intuition is correct or not? Your intuition is correct if the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. And the correct intuition is one form satisfying several or multiple intentions. On the blank slide, we envision a public plaza that is raised as open steps, but elevated off the ground to respond to not the scale of a nation, but the scale of the company. Building form on three sides, enclosing and protecting these steps, leaving a gap or opening in the middle to view out, and allowing the city to view inwards. And this is the development of the idea of an opening that we have first tested on the interior scale. The moment you have an opening, you will be more conscious of the other side. When we say that a building connects with the city, it is entirely true because it is entirely perceivable. Sectional perspective, we have the auditorium that is part of the brief, expressed as steps, and on the ground, on the floor below, we have an open communal floor. On the ground level, the vehicular entry is actually right through the middle, very ceremonial, very articulated. Landscaping, a nice reception. Basement parking with 2 loading unloading bays. Podium floor, we have the meeting rooms overlooking the high space at the entry foyer that is below the steps. Typical tower floor, we want to show that we can have open workstations arranged either horizontally, perpendicular to the facade, team leaders at the front, or at private offices in the middle, even an entire wing of senior management and a meeting room. The brief for all competitions will generally be very generic. So it is very important to show that the architecture that you propose is able to accommodate all sorts of internal layouts. The auditorium floor with the gymnasium. Notice a deliberate detail for the sun shading. On the facade, it is a single line, and you tilt either to the left or the right, which is shown here. On the same line, the sun shading fin tilts either to the left or to the right, so that in the sun, you can make for a more receptive or more animated facade. View of the proposed imagery, where we see, due to this tilting, the facade pattern gets very rich in the morning and in the evening. The underside of the ceiling becomes like beacons that glow for the rest of the city. we imagine the building beside the city, and the sense of transparency is not only important as a metaphor for the company's philosophy, it is also entirely perceptual. It is very important to convince the owners that this is the right imagery. This is representative of the concepts or ideas that they want to project to the rest of the city. From the steps viewing up, this mutual reflection of interior lights makes a certain pattern, and that calls for, or rather it evokes a certain romance or the urbanity. Interior view, public steps for the entire company, and a view of the city beyond. The winning team will be announced after the end of the pandemic, but we are keeping our fingers crossed. To conclude this presentation, I would like to show you the animation. Because competitions are always hard pressed for time, we only managed 60 seconds of the animation, and you wouldn't be able to hear the music, but here goes. Thank you very much.
That was a wonderful lecture, Mr. Woon. We have questions flowing in from the students. So
Yes.
let us organize and throw in a few thoughts on the questions.
Right.
Just a moment. So the first question would be like, how does the client really get convinced when they don't perceive your space? I know we have 3Ds and stuff, but still there is a limitation of client perception, the kind of the gradient and all those things we talk about. Right? So how do you manage to convince the client is one question from the second years?
Yeah, it is a very good question, especially when this lecture talks about perceptions. How do you show or convey perceptions to the owners or the clients? To address that, you hear certain competitions requiring the virtual walkthrough. The client team are able to put on the goggles and look at the space. That is one way, but it is very expensive to do that, or at least at this moment in time. And then we also recall previously, let's say Frank Lloyd Wright, how does he convince a client to accept his design? He doesn't have renders, maybe just sketches. And yet, at that time, you could receive client buy-in. So I think perception at the very end is about communication. You could do it with sketches, you could do it with render, you could do it with the walkthrough. We also want to reserve some kind of a non-definition, because it shouldn't be the case that architecture is fully manifested in the beginning. There are times where you have a concept, you have a sketch, you can verbalize certain spaces. And such a process, I believe, adds value to architecture, and it allows the imaginative mind to fill the gaps, rather than I give you a virtual walkthrough and you seemingly perceive the space as it is. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Quite interesting. The second question would be like, how, I mean, we are talking about house, so where they have a budgetary constraint. So how do you compare the regular shape-based interior design and these kind of odd cutoffs and things? So how do you compare the costing and how do you go for it?
Remember the
Yeah,
gradient space?
so excuse me. Yes. Can you stop the presentation? Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, great.
So that we have
So,
a full screen
yes.
view. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The question about budget, I didn't explain if you remember our second project, gradient space. The reason why we did so detailed drawings is because we are afraid that the design will go off budget. One way to solve that, as we have tried, is this. If the contractor doesn't understand your design, they will tend to buffer more because they do not want to lose money. So as designers, what you can do to manage the budget is to develop the design to be as clear as possible. The contractors saw this with all the diagrams and views. They know it looks very buildable, and they are convinced. They are not afraid to buffer a higher cost. So that was how we used a very detailed set of bidding and construction documents to allow the project to be within budget. If you compare curvature and linear, it depends on the quantity. If the quantity is enough, you could have a mold, and that would be cost effective. In our design for St. Regis, we had a basic module. That is also with regards to budget, because if you have one module that you can apply throughout and you just delete, then we will be confident that such a design would be within budget because it's modular. And with the advancement of 3D printing, let's say you 3D print the facade component. It takes the same time to print a straight line versus a curved line, maybe. So once you have that, we call it the mass customization. If it is the same printing time for 10 different geometries, then you are not restricted anymore by a straight angle being cheaper. Yeah. So advancements in construction techniques are changing how we perceive price also.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, you have mentioned in one of the projects, the shelf which segregates the two spaces, that the clients liked dark colors, which is very nice, you said. I mean, is it a curiosity that architects, we do like gloomy dark colors, or how is it? What is your thought on it?
Architects like dark colors, maybe. Architects tend to like to dress in black. But I think there is something deeper to that. Bright colors or bright spaces are very uplifting. But if you immerse yourself in a dark space, shadows are very calming. Shadows feel more intimate. I'm not sure if we could link that to prehistoric man residing in caves and the dark shadow of the caves create a certain kind of protection, a sense of being well protected, being very secure. So I think clients or people's perception or preference for something bright, it may well be engineered by what we see now on Instagram, on design magazines. You see that being a trend, you see it commonly applied, but it doesn't mean the opposite is not desirable. It doesn't necessarily mean the opposite is not desirable. So we were glad that we have the opportunity to explore a dark palette, which turned out very well. When you're in the space, the entire cabinet, which is proportioned correctly to the living space, the darkness makes it more grounded, and you feel the aura projecting upwards as much better than a light colored laminate.
Okay, that's nicely put in the sense from prehistoric man. Yeah, thank you for that. Then the next question is actually out of my curiosity. For the semi-detached house, for the regulatory purposes, right? We have a control on the percentage of shared wall to the structure has to be together, and also the pitch roof, the rear pitch roof, which should touch the springing up from the roof line, right? How did you manage to convince the regulatory bodies on that?
You are speaking as somebody who has practiced in Singapore.
Yeah.
Very good observation, and thank you for that. We have what we call an envelope control. So they allow the maximum envelope, the springing line from the two sides, 45 degrees. We get around that because the client says they do not need a big house. So the sloping part is actually for the attic, which we do not have. We stop at the 3rd floor. So by height, we avoided having to go to the sloping portion. And then within the space on plan, that shifting of the wall, that detachment of the building block from the party wall, as long as it is within the setback, which it is, you could express that, or you could articulate that within that envelope. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Professor Tamilalil also has a few questions for you. Over to Professor Elin.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a few questions from the students. The one question is on the poetic references and analogies for the projects, especially with the first two projects, I think. Is it an afterthought for the geometric design manifestation, or it is a vice versa?
Oh, asking whether the reasons are an afterthought
Yes.
Okay, very good question. Very good question. I would say this. In my webinar, I share this thing about intuition. So I would share this intimately because intuition, at least from my education, intuition is something that is not encouraged. As a student, if you say my intuition gave this form, in front of the critics, you will not be spared. So I experienced this emphasis on the rational and the methodical part of architecture as a student. But as I practice or understand more of design, the intuitive, I find, is more important. Or if you think of your design, the better ones are usually with some form of intuition. It is not just rationality alone. So understanding this nature of intuition, that the moment you got it, you may not be able to yet fully explain. This calls for what we call post-rationalization, which again, this is a very bad word, at least from my architectural education. You are not supposed to post-rationalize something. So I am strongly against that, because for me, design is two directions. You have the rational part, and you allow your mind to incubate ideas and welcome any intuitive that comes up. So, which again brings to the importance of this webinar, or the ideas that are put forth. If intuition or the immaginables or the perceptual in architecture cannot be made intelligible, then it will forever be casted out. And students or designers will think that those were not supposed to be. Design must be first idea and then formed in a very logical and methodical method. I do not believe in that. That is why, if we can articulate intuition or feelings, even using post-rationalization, you are actually comprehending what you feel. If you can do that, then you can present this in your creed. You can present this to your client, and you no longer need to stay away from intuition. And that, I think, is a good thing.
Yes, that's really a in-depth insight on the design approach. Okay, the next question is on yeah, I think being a musician yourself, how do you explain the relationship between the music and the geometry? I'm sure this is quite out of that lecture topic. But as a student, like how to inspire from music and then transfer that concepts into architecture. Yeah, is that a
very interesting question. This reminds me of when I was an intern at a local firm. The principal asked us, I mean, there are 3 or 4 interns at the office. The principal asked, what is the difference between architecture and the rest of the arts? And she gave us the answer. The difference is function. Architecture or design, product design, furniture design, it has the utilitarian aspect. It has a functional aspect. Whereas you can create music or painting, and you do not need to fulfill specific utilitarian roles. It's just for delight or expression of emotion. So the difference is therefore function. And in my sharing, I try to undermine function. I say that very frankly and without reservations. Undermining not because I do not think functional is not important. You have to be very functional, but you must have the spare capacity to pursue all that is intangible. So coming back to music and architecture, we have heard this saying that architecture is frozen music. There is some sense. The greater link is if we analyze this tool and find out what is the underlying principle. It's actually a sense of rhythm. Music has that rhythm. Architecture, through proportion, through manipulation of form, it also expresses that. And I would say, as architects, we should immerse in music, look at art, look at sculptures, because those things will allow you to pick up certain ideas and you apply them into architecture, because your client is not going to tell you, derive the idea from music or what. The client will tell you, I need this house, how big is it, what is the budget, don't ever exceed the budget. So it is up to the architect, knowing that the perceptual and immeasurable is important. Then he or she will pursue that and try to find, like how I analyze a concave is intimate. Everyone could do such exercise. You could listen to a phrase in music and you think, why is this interesting? Is it because the rhythm has a certain pattern? And what if you extract that and apply into a space? So the possibilities are endless. If you were just to know what to pick up and know what to look out for.
Okay, thank you. And there is one basic question from a student. As a student, when I design the buildings using simple geometrical forms, especially cube and its derivatives, my friends question me why I have chose simple form and nothing is interesting. How should I make them understand that it is functionally and aesthetically a good form?
I would like to question whether cubes are functionally and aesthetically a good form. I would like to question this statement. Let me put it this way. All forms are neutral. You cannot say a cube is better than curve. You cannot say triangles are. And therefore, you cannot say cubes are, you cannot label it as cubes are interesting and functional. If you do not achieve good design, it is this thing about intersubjectivity that I briefly touched on in the webinar. When we design a house, we expect, or ID, we expect the owner to get what we are trying to do. So it is similar. The same exercise is, it happens when, as a student, I do something and I hope my classmates will agree that it is beautiful. So if that doesn't happen, then it is time to go to the drawing board, and you would then have to understand that geometry more. And first of all, we should try not to say statements about cube being simple and functional. Let's have an open mind and see where or why it is not interesting. Is it because it doesn't have the rhythm of the music, or what happened? So whenever we come into a design as a student with preconceived forms, it is already not a good starting point. We should go back to the basics. See this cube or the assembly of cubes as how it is. Be very honest about your perception, and then evaluate from there whether this is a good solution to my design.
Okay. Yeah. There is one more question regarding the light, natural light. I think regarding that the gradient project. So in that, it seems that there is some compromise on the natural light, so that the interior, the design has been dominating the interior space. Thing. So
Okay, maybe because we see some portions in shadow.
okay.
Remember the part in front of the wardrobe, and that is already having a very high side of it. This relates to our impression of the third project that we use a dark geometry. I would say that light and darkness are also neutral. There is no finite or fixed appreciation for the light or for the dark. What happens, or what we want to achieve, is what we call the design being very animated. Animated as in with the passing of the sunlight, different planes or different surfaces have different qualities throughout the day. It changes very lively. And in gradient space, I think we have achieved that, at least on the parts that people gather and congregate. The shadow portion in front of the wardrobe is more for her. There's a standing mirror there, so she'll be doing makeup. That shadow is actually befitting a certain kind of privacy compared to a space that is uniformly bright. We have certain kind of a spatial differentiation achieved from that particular form.
Yeah, nicely put, Mr. Wong, on that. And Mr. Wong, so the next question, then the last question would be, is it okay to take inspiration from great architects, as you seen in your just the one before the final project, or the last one as well? The inspiration was taken from the entry of the building, which is actually related to how this building interacts to the outside. So, can it be okay if the outcome is the iconic influence? How far you control that part? How much of it is affected the outcome, and how much of it is? I mean, yeah, I think I made the point.
Yeah.
Please explain it. Yes, thank you.
We always we cannot be not affected by good works because we have seen, we have visited places, but we have to consciously resist imitation, and that I say by analyzing certain perceptual qualities and extracting the principles. The steps that I reference for the Parliament House is actually just open to sky and a single plane. So that steps, we brought it up and we elevated it to enclose. We have buried the steps within a U-shaped geometry, which itself is something different. The steps in the Parliament House is connected to the ground because people go up there. Now with the denial of the public space, that prompted us to lift the steps. Now it is only for at the scale of the company. And we, of course, for security purposes, no headquarters will allow any public person to come up. But that doesn't mean we cannot express civicness. The city, when you're walking around, you see the steps, you see that publicness, that would have impacted you. You would have known and you would have agreed or understood that the feeling of the publicness, and you start to see whether each building could then clone that civicness, each architect expressing it differently. So a single building doing the first thing, if that idea is relevant, then other people will start to have their own interpretation and it becomes a dialogue. Yeah.
I mean, very aptly put it actually, because we usually have this problem with students, how far I can get inspired, how far I can stop. We always have this thing, but very aptly put it. And I think this would have been a very sensitizing answer for the students. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for it. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Architect Chung, Mr. Chung Yen.
Hi, Vino. Hi.
Firstly, I'm sure Meta Architects will be the one to back the competition project at Best Wishes
Thank you so
from
much.
the CAAD fraternity. That was a very, very sensitively attempted lecture. No surprise, it comes from even more sensitively administered real-time projects where you deal with even more complex challenges, I'm sure. I'm sure all these intuitions that you mentioned comes from the thoughts that you have put into the projects, the number of iterations that you would have gone through, and also from your vast experience. The way you deciphered how the physical piece of architecture evoke intangible emotions and perceptions is really thought-provoking. And also, the way you dealt things right from the small projects in the interior, the curves in the interiors, the way the diagonal lines in the gradient space project, to the profound understanding of its perceptual implication on the space is really astounding, I would say. Every architecture school endeavors to understand the form, space, and life. And I'm sure this is a rightly timed lecture to retrospect the ongoing projects at our institution, CAAD, also. And the way you explained the projects and how you took the questions not only explains how much you understood the elements of design, but also how much you have mastered people, life, territory, and on top of all, the human perception. I especially liked your response, like all forms are neutral. I mean, that was a sweeping statement. I mean, ever since we had been debating on the capabilities of forms and different forms and how different each forms and how does it conflict with one another. I mean, this is a sweeping statement. I'm sure we can carry on these discussions in the of this lecture to our studios, and the students will be able to treat the lines and the shapes with more respect and sensitivity henceforth. As an architecture school, it also leaves us with a greater sense of responsibility about the kind of projects that we give to the students, the way we educate the students to perceive and communicate their design. Thank you very much. I mean, it has been very intense. I mean, it is already 2 hours since the lecture has started. We planned it for an hour, but it already stretched to 2 hours, and we really are still immersed in the lecture itself. Thank you very much, Mr. Chung. May
Thank
I?
you. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Great, great. May I request Dushyant to propose a formal vote of thanks?
On behalf of CAAD, Chennai Academy of Architecture and Design, we would like to thank architect Woon Chung for sparing his time to sensitize our students in terms of how you read spaces, how you feel spaces, and how you make it at the end of the day. So we thank you so much for the eye-opening speech on this session, which is CAD lecture 2055. And we thank our chairman, Dr. V.R. Rajendran, for his for our support on whatever endeavors we take. And we would like to thank our director, Vinod Vijay Kumar, who stand thick and thin with us in whatever proposals we give, and for making things happen at a flick of finger. We thank you so much for that. And we'd like to thank the organizing team, the technical team, and the supporting team which streams the Facebook Live as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for the team effort.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.